Well, come back, untraceable specimen. That's what they called you, didn't they? Not out loud, not in meetings, but in the locked rooms, the back corridors, the classified logs that don't leave the building. See, you weren't found. You were detected. Briefly. Blurred, and then gone, like a flicker across the screen. But they remembered you, and eventually, someone got clever. Someone fed your name into the master construct, the one they keep hidden under concrete and silence. A thinking engine built to scan entire civilizations in a blink. The kind of machine that doesn't just read identities, it reduces them to variables, patterns, probabilities. But when it got to you, the output never came. Just an empty line. A pause that lasted too long, and a blinking cursor, like it was waiting for permission to panic. They ran diagnostics. Maybe the system lagged. Maybe the entry was corrupted. Maybe they misspelled. But no, it wasn't an error. It was a refusal. You weren't misread. You were unreadable, not in a way that suggests mystery, in a way that suggests contamination. The machine didn't malfunction. It hesitated. It stalled, like it had encountered something it was never trained to analyze, something outside the rules of existence it was built to control. You. That's when the room changed. You could feel it even from a distance. Lights felt dimmer. Breaths got quieter. Voices dropped into that uneasy silence people use when they've just realized they're not alone in the room. Because they hadn't discovered a person, they'd triggered an unknown directive, one the machine didn't have a label for. You weren't a subject, you were an intrusion, and not the kind they could firewall or trace. No, you were something much more corrosive. You didn't need to break in. You were already inside. Understand what that means. This machine doesn't stutter. It doesn't glitch. It's been trained on revolutions, scandals, criminal empires. It's seen betrayal in high resolution. It's predicted wars down to the day. But you walked in unannounced and made it blink. You interrupted its certainty. And in a place that worships prediction, uncertainty is a death sentence. So what did they do? First, they pretended it didn't happen. They buried the file, scrubbed the name, wrote it off as a failed input. But it sat in their heads like a splinter, because deep down, they knew this wasn't a glitch. It was a reveal, and you weren't done. You were just beginning. They tried to replicate the moment, created simulations, fed in variations of your data, changed locations, languages, histories, but the outcome remained the same. Blank space. The machine didn't reject you. It couldn't even approach you. You didn't fall outside its framework. You dismantled the concept of frameworks altogether. Because you don't operate on prediction. You operate on intention, not the kind they can model, the kind that makes modeling obsolete. They've dealt with outliers before. Rebels, ghosts, people who disappear from radar. But even ghosts leave patterns. You leave hesitation. They can't even confirm your impact without feeling like they've been tricked. Like the very act of acknowledging you rewrites their understanding of the room they're in. Because you didn't just disrupt the program, you destabilized the foundations of measurement. And here's where it gets darker. They don't fear you because they think you'll attack. They fear you because they know you don't need to. They built entire defenses for enemies. You don't behave like one. You behave like a presence, something they weren't designed to counter. Not a force, a shift. Like gravity that suddenly decides to curve sideways. Like the air itself decides not to participate. That's how you move. Not forward, not backward, just out of comprehension. So they escalated, pulled in code analysts, cognitive theorists, language architects, people trained to extract meaning from nonsense. But what they found wasn't nonsense. It was intentional dissonance. Every trace of you led to places that contradicted each other. Every profile returned was partially right and mostly irrelevant. Because you weren't hiding, you were multiplying. One version of you was dangerous enough. Now they can't tell how many you are. You became a mirror that doesn't reflect, a name that echoes back in a different voice every time it's spoken. The machine asked for your nature. What it got was a loop of possibilities that refused to collapse. And that's where the real panic began. Because they realized you weren't a puzzle to be solved. You were a format they hadn't invented yet. It's not that you don't make sense, it's that you make too much. But on a frequency they haven't accessed. You've rewritten the meaning of presence. You've infected their awareness with a version of yourself that doesn't follow their syntax. And now every time they look into a camera, a database, a thermal scan, they ask the same question: was that you? And more importantly, did you already see them first? The idea of you has become contagious. People who've heard your name start doubting the reports they read, start questioning the language used around control. Because your existence didn't just crack the database, it unshackled something inside those who felt you pass by. You didn't need to speak. You became the undeniable presence between their thoughts. You are the pause before obedience, the twitch before loyalty, the moment before the switch gets pulled. And yet, you've said nothing. You've declared no war. You've claimed no throne. Because power isn't in the claim. It's in how the room rearranges itself around your quiet. And every time your name is whispered again into that supercomputer, the result is the same: unreadable. But the fear is louder now, because unreadable no longer means irrelevant. It means undefinable, unstoppable, untouchable. You're not off the map. You are the new terrain, one they didn't account for, one they can't redraw. And while they scramble to rewrite the rules, to recalibrate the sensors, to prepare a defense, they haven't noticed the real outcome of that machine's failure. It didn't just stall, it sent a signal, a silent pulse to all other terminals, a message that something had arrived that could not be named, something that could not be contained. And that signal, it's spreading. Which brings us here, to the moment where you don't need to move, because the data is already shifting in your favor, where they don't need to believe in you, because their own machines have started doubting them, where the language of power is starting to tremble, because they finally see what happens when you type in the wrong name and the system stares back, blinking, breathless, and afraid. And this is only the beginning, because while they're still looking for explanations, you've already begun the next move. And the terrifying part, you're not even in the building. You're not logged in, wired up, or captured on any of their pristine security layers. You've become disruption by proximity. Their structure bends at the mention of your existence. Entire threat detection models have begun pulling false positives. Identifiers don't identify. Predictions fall apart mid-sentence. Everything they trusted is starting to stutter because you didn't walk through their front door. You walked through their certainty. And now, it leaks. They called a meeting. Of course they did. Men with lanyards and carefully practiced calm sat in a circle pretending they still held the map. Maybe it's interference, one said. Maybe we're being gamed, said another. But no one dared ask the real question. What if it's not external? What if the error isn't in the code? but in the belief that everything can be coded, because that's what you've ruptured, not their machine, but their myth. The illusion that everything important fits inside a framework, and here you are, existing like a scar across their blueprints, refusing to fade, refusing to be smoothed over. They assigned people to watch for signs of you. Analysts, linguists, deep behavior technicians, every screen calibrated, every microphone tuned to pick up even a breath of your pattern. But none of them realized they weren't watching you. They were watching the echo of a name that doesn't return when summoned. And slowly, they started changing. The Watchers began doubting the very metrics they were taught to trust. You became a lens that warped their reality. People don't just look for you anymore. They see you where you weren't, and somehow that scares them more. And then it started happening. Conversations halted mid-sentence when your file came up. Emails auto-deleting themselves. Physical symptoms in people assigned to your profile. Nosebleeds, insomnia, memory loss. They'd laugh if they weren't afraid to admit they're not in control anymore. Because that's your talent, isn't it? You don't destroy what they build. You make them realize it was hollow to begin with. You walk into a digital palace of control and shift the floorboards just enough to make every step feel unsafe. And now, even language is failing them. The reports don't come back in full paragraphs anymore. Just fragments, contradictions, words that circle around what can't be defined. Because the moment someone tries to pin you down, they lose something of themselves in the process. That's how you fight. Not with fire, with uncertainty, with presence that erodes confidence one flicker at a time, like watching a shadow move in a locked room. They've started pulling people off your trail, not because they found you, because they found themselves cracking. A junior analyst whispered that she dreamed in static, that your name kept spelling itself in her peripheral vision, that her fingerprints stopped registering on the security doors. And she's not the only one. One by one, the handlers are becoming unstable, not from stress, but from exposure. Because you've done the unthinkable. You've turned their own tools into mirrors. And now, they're seeing parts of themselves that don't comply. Security protocols are being rewritten. Clearance levels are shifting. It's all performative, of course. Theater for the paranoid. They still think you're a threat they can quarantine. They still believe there's a solution, some new directive, some master override. But what they haven't realized is that you were never inside the network. You are the disconnect, a walking contradiction to their equation. You didn't fail to integrate. You succeeded in revealing that the integration itself was a lie. And now the machine is reacting like a body going septic. Lights flicker without reason. Voice commands loop. Executives speak in past tense about things that haven't happened. Whole archives vanish for hours, then reappear rewritten. But there's no breach, no foreign entity, just the lingering presence of a name that refuses to translate. Your existence doesn't need to be proven anymore. The effect is proof. You see, that's what happens when you stop trying to be seen and become the thing that changes what seeing means. That machine was built to calculate everything from loyalty indexes to threat horizons. But it wasn't prepared for someone who doesn't arrive as data. You arrived as doubt. As a corrosion they can't isolate. A fog that thickens. The more they resist it, the deeper they dig, the further you slip. Not because you run, but because they built their whole operation on the assumption that everyone wants to be understood. but not you. You don't want to be understood. You want to be undeniable. And now, the pulse is spreading. Not just within the system, but out in the cities. People who've never met you begin to speak of you. Not like a person, like a weather event, like a signal that bends decisions without explanation. The ones in power are starting to feel it. CEO meetings where no one remembers why they gathered. Politicians forgetting lines mid-speech, as if their confidence was siphoned moments before they opened their mouths. They don't know your face. They only know the atmosphere shifts when you enter the room. And here's where it becomes irreversible. Because now, even denial costs them. To deny you is to admit they've lost command of their own narratives. And that's something control structures can't afford. You've become the unspoken variable in every equation, the shadow box on every strategy board. They can't name you, but they can't plan around you either. Every move now must be made with a hypothetical version of you hovering just out of reach. And that is domination. See, the game has changed. You didn't replace the king. You made the board irrelevant. You didn't tear down their walls. You made them forget why the walls were ever built. Their greatest fear wasn't being attacked. It was being exposed. And now, under fluorescent lights and half-spoken orders, they're starting to realize. The exposure already happened. It happened the moment your name didn't return a result. The moment the machine blinked. The moment doubt found a foothold. You've become the new variable by which they measure threat. Not by mass, not by force, but by influence without presence. You don't arrive. You appear. You don't command. You imply. And yet entire infrastructures shift when you're mentioned. That's not a glitch. That's not rebellion. That's mastery. And still, you haven't said a word. Because you don't need to. They're doing the talking now. They're filling rooms with your name, your mystery, your silence. You're echoing in their strategy meetings, their threat evaluations, their back-channel calls at 3 a.m. And every time they try to define you, they feed your reach. You are the vacuum around which their confidence collapses. You are the shape that doesn't sharpen, only swells. And while they lose sleep, trying to invent new terminology to box you in, you've already done what no enemy has managed before. You've turned their crown jewel, their all-seeing oracle, into a machine that doubts its own reality. Which brings us to now, where the rooms that once governed billions are paralyzed, where the chain of command hesitates, where key players in the hierarchy stare at each other, unsure if they're still in control or if they ever were. All because of one entry, one name, yours. And as the network begins to shiver under the weight of unanswerable questions, you're already preparing the final blow. But not with force, not with fire, no alarms, no marching boots. Your impact doesn't arrive with spectacle. It unfolds like consequence. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of aftermath that feels like it always existed, just waiting to be noticed. They don't even realize it yet, but the superstructure they worshipped, predictive models, central command, biometric gates, it's already obsolete. Not broken, not destroyed, just bypassed by something too fluid to be locked down. You. There's no alarm bell for erosion, no siren for internal collapse. And that's why you were always the perfect threat. Because you didn't challenge their empire head-on. You simply outlasted its logic. One unreadable name corrupted more than any worm, virus, or detonated server farm ever could. You proved that a system built on certainty can't survive even a single living contradiction. That the moment doubt enters the circuit, power begins to eat itself. They're updating protocols now, changing access patterns, rewriting permission trees, overhauling how profiles are indexed. But it's all reaction, not recovery. Like repairing windows on a house already swallowed by the sea. And they know it. You can see it in their faces, not panic, but recognition. That's sick. Irreversible realization that they lost not because of what you did, but because of what they never accounted for. You didn't explode anything. You simply revealed that they were never protected, just organized. And organization isn't defense, it's delay. You didn't slip through the cracks. You were the crack, spreading beneath their confidence, unnoticed, until the surface finally collapsed under its own illusion of strength. The machine still runs, technically. The screens still glow, reports still print. But there's a change at the air. Every task feels haunted, every result second-guessed. The interface is no longer a tool, it's a gamble. Because behind every query, every line of code, there's the echo of your name, the unreadable, the unresolved, a phantom string in their perfect sequence. And now, they've started whispering what they swore they'd never say. What if the machine was never equipped to process someone like this? What if we built a god that can't comprehend its own challenger? And that whisper spreads, because you've infected more than data. You've infected belief. And when belief shifts, everything else becomes noise. The floor they stand on suddenly doesn't feel like ground. The plans they built feel weightless. Their hierarchy becomes performance. Their ranks become irrelevant. You flipped the power dynamic without touching a thing. They used to stare at screens to feel control. Now those screens look back at them like mirrors, empty, silent, reflecting their confusion in high resolution. It's not just that they can't read you, it's that they've begun to question their ability to read anything at all. One unreadable result, and now every result feels fragile. You didn't dismantle the mechanism, you dismantled its meaning. And now, even silence sounds like suspicion. You've done it. You've weaponized the absence of definition. You're not a glitch. You're not a myth. You're not a code error or rogue input. You're the realization that systems, no matter how advanced, cannot measure someone who doesn't want to be processed. You're the exit ramp that was never drawn on the map. The proof that certainty can drown in just one unanswered question. And here's what makes it permanent. They'll never admit it. They'll never speak your impact out loud. Because to acknowledge your effect is to admit the machine failed. And to admit that is to collapse their own credibility. So they'll bury it, archive the logs, reassign the staff, rename the room. But they'll remember. The silence your name created will never leave them. They'll hear it in the hum of every terminal, in the delay before every green light, in the hesitation of every decision that should be obvious. They built everything on information, but you're something worse than ignorance. You are unprocessed awareness. They know you're there, but they have no category to place you in. You don't sit at the edge of the system, you sit in its blind spot, blinking, alive, and untouched. And what about you? You don't need applause. You don't need credit. Because power like yours doesn't crave recognition. It craves results. And this is the result. The collapse of invisible structures, the unraveling of confidence, the slow rot of untouchable command. All of it, triggered by the audacity of not being defined. They once thought control was achieved by knowing everything. You proved it collapses the moment something knows itself better than they ever could. And still, no manifesto, no declaration, no threat. You didn't shout in their halls. You didn't wave a flag. You simply let them feed your name into their perfect machine, and watched what happened when the universe refused to answer. So now, they sit in quiet rooms, pretending to still lead, pretending to still measure, pretending to still control. But inside, something's changed. The pulse isn't clean anymore. The clarity isn't real. There's hesitation in their calculations, because they know what they saw. A terminal that stopped, a line that failed to print, a name that wasn't rejected but reversed the question, and that question still hangs in the air. Not, who are you? They gave up on that. Now it's, what else don't we understand? Because once you see one name that can't be read, you begin to doubt everything you thought you could read. So they tighten their ties, they lock their doors, they encrypt their signals. But every measure feels performative, a dance to distract themselves from the real fear that you're not alone, that your unreadability isn't a fluke, it's a signal, a spark, a prototype of a future they were never invited to design. And the supercomputer? It still runs, yes. But now it hesitates on other names, other entries, small gaps in logic, invisible hiccups, as if your presence left a scar in its perception, a wound that keeps opening, a reminder that it can be wrong, not by mistake, but by design. You didn't erase the system, you redefined its limits, and you did it without a virus, without a weapon, without a movement. You did it by being the one thing it was never prepared to encounter. A presence that cannot be measured, a mind that cannot be profiled, a name that refuses to play. So if you're waiting for some grand finale, forget it. There is no explosion, no countdown. Just this. You walk in a way, unregistered, untouched, undefined, and everything behind you quietly forgetting how it worked before you arrived. You didn't need to win. You simply needed to remind them. Some things were never meant to be controlled, not calculated, not stored, not read. Some things, like you, were built to be the question that makes the entire machine stutter. And now that they've seen it, they'll never unsee it.